I always think about what's the ultimate purpose of any of this. If I thought there was a better way to be happy, I would pursue that way. This is kind of the way I think of it. So if I really thought that becoming wealthy and powerful, to take the most common example, was going to make me happy, then I'd say fuck Buddhism. I'm going to work on being wealthy and powerful because that's how I'm going to be happy. You
Yeah.
know, but you can have a moral sense of not wanting to hurt others and all of that, but you can still find a way to be wealthy and powerful without doing too much harming of others. So why not? But I feel looking at the world and looking at how people are, that wealth and power don't equal happiness. This was
Yeah.
sort of something I knew, but then when I worked for Tsuburaya Productions, I was working in a film company, and I was regularly encountering people who were very rich and very powerful people, these film exec people and actors and famous people, and I'd see just how miserable they were, and I'd just go, wow, you are so miserable. I remember this one time I met this guy who made tons of money, and he was an exec, and he was powerful, and et cetera, et cetera, and he was in a position that I would have thought would make a person very relaxed and happy, and he was just a mess. And during my encounters with him, he took it, he paid a lot of attention to try to make me feel smaller than him. I'm like, why? You
Mm.
know? Why aren't you just relaxed in your money and power? And so that kind of, so I don't know. That's what I think. so
I
so
mean,
I do this because I think it's the best way.
yeah. And I think obviously money and power don't make people happy. Yeah.
Well, then there's other things. People think lots of sex is going to make them happy, or they think being on drugs all the time is going to make them happy, or fitting in with normal society. And people pursue happiness in a lot of ways, and I
Mm.
just feel like this works. I sit and I meditate, and I have these principles that I attempt to live by. you know I made certain vows.
Really?
Yeah. I
Did you make
I
vows?
took my vows three different occasions. You know, because I did a Jukai with maybe I could count four. I did a Jukai with Nishijima Roshi. I did a um, Dharma transmission ceremony, which is a sort of, there's the vows are included in that if I remember correctly. And then I did a wedding. My wedding was a Zen style wedding, which is like a
Oh,
precepts ceremony.
yay.
And then I joined Soto Shu officially. Did the Shukei Tokudo and did it again. So I'm like,
Yeah.
four goddamn times I vowed to uphold these stupid rules.
um,
I don't know.
what were we talking about?
I don't
We were
know.
talking
I don't know. I just went on a rant there. I'm sorry.
about stupid rules. Yeah, people often ask me about my vows. It's
Yeah.
funny. Did I tell you about this? Like, people, they don't have any context for like Zen nun. Like, there's no, people just think Catholic nun. So
Yeah,
people
yeah.
will bring up my vows. I'm like, I took vows? Really? Because usually what people are referring to is celibacy,
Yeah.
like some vow of celibacy. And there's no vow of celibacy. Um, and even nuns in Japan who are celibate have not taken a vow of celibacy. Like, that's not why they're celibate. Like, they're choosing to not get married and to live with other nuns. But there's no vow of celibacy. So,
That's interesting because I was just going to ask you that because we did have this discussion at Tassajara. Um, yeah, there's no vow of celibacy. Although in other forms of Buddhism there is a vow of celibacy. I would say in
yeah,
Theravada Buddhism especially.
yeah.
I don't know if it's permanent with them. It might be a training uh,
I think it's
thing.
permanent, like
Is
in
it?
Thailand and Burma. It's for life, yeah.
Okay. You know, because I usually explain it to
Oh
people
wait,
that
sorry, that's not true. I mean, you can take temporary ordination and then it's only permanent for the time that you do. Like I did, I ordained for 10 days in the Burmese tradition, and I guess I took a vow of celibacy for 10 days, and then
yeah, I've done that for 10 years. No, I'm just kidding. Um, but yeah, it's an interesting thing because usually I say, well, there isn't really a vow of celibacy, although when you're training, uh, there's a sort of de facto vow
mm,
of celibacy because
too busy.
how are you gonna get any action during that process? Um, but but once you're done with it, it's whatever. But so why you kind of mentioned to me that most Japanese Buddhist nuns you're aware of are celibate.
Yeah.
Uh, and most Japanese monks generally are not. I would say, I mean, at least it's not that they're going out and having sex all the time, but
Well,
they're
some of
usually
them.
some of them are, yeah. But they do their training and then they go out and they get married,
Yeah.
and that's a sort of normal thing. The priest is married and his wife is there and they live at the temple and they have some kids and um, why is it that the nuns though become isn't that sexism? As a feminist, aren't you upset about that?
I mean, it's interesting because I think that, I know we did talk about this before. I think two things can be happening at the same time. Like, I think you can have prejudice and sexism, and you can have women making an informed choice, and they can overlap at the same time. And I think that's what's happening with nuns in marriage. Like, there is a double standard, of course, and women have been oppressed and disenfranchised in Japan and continue to be. Um, so I think in people's minds there's like the virgin whore complex that a religious woman has to be pure, and so a Buddhist nun has to be celibate. I think that exists in people's brains, but the nuns I train with and who are my friends and teachers choose to dedicate their life to Buddhism because that's what they want to do, and they believe that they're living closer to what the historical Buddha and what Dogen said monks and nuns should do. So it's a pride. They're proud of being celibate, and they believe they are true monastics, and that Ayama Roshi speaks pretty openly and explicitly about how Japanese monks in Japan are not authentic because they're married.
She says that, huh?
Oh yeah, she's not even trying to be polite about it. But not even monk. Like it's not for her. It's not a gender thing. She thinks all like men and women, monks and nuns, both should be celibate. She's told that to me.
It's interesting. I had this incident where I was it was right after I got my head shaved for my Shukei Tokudo. I went to this Chinese vegetarian restaurant that was in Nakano. So it's in Japan, but this Taiwanese woman ran this tiny little 5-seat restaurant inside this shopping center in Nakano that I used to love going to because it's hard to get vegetarian food in Japan sometimes, right? And this place was great. She was terrific. But when she saw my head shaved, she asked me why I shaved my head, and I said, "Well, I'm becoming a monk." It was funny because she was Chinese and I was American, and our common language was English, was Japanese. So we're both speaking not our own language. But she got really livid, and said Japanese Buddhists are not real Buddhists because they're married, and it's kind of the same thing. But she got really angry about this, and she finally settled down. But I didn't go to her restaurant for a while, and I'd gone there, like a couple times a week for years, But I was kind of scared of her. Eventually, I kind of went back there when my hair had grown back, and she never said anything more about it. But I find that interesting because I thought, oh, that maybe that's the Chinese position. So it's interesting to hear a Japanese person saying that.
Yeah. I think it's very confusing for people too, and a lot of the lay people I talked to, Tasahara, um, affirmed this for me that it's confusing if you have a married monk. Like, what does that mean? What does monasticism mean if you're married? Um,
Yeah, and I would agree, and you know, I had this I've struggled with this too because I had this conversation with Nishijima Roshi once after one of the, I don't know which of the ceremonies that I just described to you I'd taken, but it was shortly after one of them, maybe the Shukkei Tokudo even, I don't know. And I said, well, what am I now? Am I a monk? And he said, yes, you're a monk. And I said, okay. You know, and I still had a job, and I was married, and I didn't live at a temple. I didn't. So yeah, I'm like, what I should have said is, well, what do you mean by that? Um, but that wasn't part of the conversation. I just kind of dealt with it. So I feel like I am something, but monk is probably not a good word, and yet this is something I wrote in the book just recently. I said it's sort of like the word hippopotamus. Hippopotamus is a terrible word for that animal. It's unwieldy, it's long, it's not descriptive, it's Latin. It's a scientific name. Yet it's the name we're stuck with. And if you want to talk about a hippopotamus, you have to say hippopotamus. So you kind of stuck with certain words that are not the best. Which may be a cop-out, but if you try to invent a new word for it, you're just going to confuse everybody, and I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, the terminology that keeps coming up for me is like Suzuki Roshi, when he was starting with the Zen Center, he said that people were neither monk nor lay people. And actually, I just learned yesterday that that was something that Shinran said, or that was associated with Shinran, who was the Japanese, this is before Dogen. He was the first monk in Japan to get married, I believe, or to publicize it and to make it a good thing.
Interesting.
He believed that, like, that was the way to get people to understand Buddhism more, was to have monks who are closer to lay people. And you can make an argument that only would work in Japanese society, that there's something unique about Japanese society that allowed that to flourish. And I don't know the history enough to argue that point, but I was talking to this professor at UC Berkeley yesterday who was making that argument, that there's something unique in Japanese culture that allowed that to happen. And so, I mean, that there is that tradition of that kind of neither monk nor lay person. And and I don't know. Ayama Roshi will always talk about, like, when Buddhism moves from culture to culture, she compares it to a wheel that's turning, and that the inside of the wheel stays the same, and the inside is the Buddha Dharma, and that stays the same in every place, and the outside is like culture and language and form. And so all that stuff is constantly changing and falling away, and the inside is staying constant. And so she brings that up about celibacy and monasticism, that there's always been this unchanging center. And, there's intellectual problems with that, obviously. But that there can be an unchanging anything. Like, what does that mean to have an unchanging anything? What does it mean that something doesn't change? You can't say that something doesn't change. But as a working metaphor, I think it's pretty good.